Right, we're live. I'm hoping this works because I'm screen sharing to Discord. In theory, anyone in the VC, you will be heard by all of YouTube as well. So it's up to you, I guess, whether or not you want to be heard by lots and lots and lots of people. But this first one's from you, Emma. Which module was this for? Is this for your FYP or something? It's quite fun. I'll have VC open so I can read messages. It was for collab. Okay. I think there are a number of things that you could do to reinforce the perspective. No, that's fine. Because the perspective's the biggest thing here. I think it works as an image anyway. Like, it's obvious that it's a hamster in a ball going forwards. Are they going down some kind of ramp? Like, maybe a lot of this motion blurred stuff in the background doesn't need to be quite as blurred, because this could be quite good context as to where this thing is. You know, is it exploring like a bedroom, in which case you could have like a chest of drawers, you know, or whatever else. You could still be motion blur, but just maybe not so heavily. Other really big indicators of perspective is like, this is a giant sphere, and on that sphere you have this like seam line for the ball where you'd open it. So let's just, if I make this bigger, I give myself a little bit more space to make notes. Bonk, bonk. So if there is a seam line here, we're imagining that it is going all the way around in an ellipse. So if it's here at the front, I have to imagine that I would also see it going back here or something, you know? But then there's another seam line down here, so I'm not really sure what's happening. Is it more like there's a joint at the side and it's doing something like that? Like that's what it feels like to me. But if that's what you want, then that would have to be more obvious with some kind of hinge mechanism at the sides, for that to be more clear, right? So let's move that color. It's a ball with no reference. Yeah, that'll be a problem. Is the no reference part. But it's a really easy fix, which is the nice thing. So potentially, you know, you could still make a change to it. Even if it's already on your ArtStation, you could just make the change and then update the image that's on the ArtStation. So, bonk, 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 bonk. So here's our seam line here. Other things to just watch out for is because it's an ellipse going round a sphere, like, it's quite, you have to be quite particular about how it connects to the silhouette of the rest of the sphere. It has to connect flush, like it's working into that line, whereas at the moment it's sort of coming up to here and it's making this T junction where actually you know, it's not, what should be happening is this, it should curve into the line of the sphere more as it's coming around. And then how would we describe it back here? Well, it could be something as simple as this actually. And I might be doing it a bit too obviously. Obviously you could turn down the opacity on it. But it might do quite well in framing your character. Like, we now literally have a circle around the character, because it would go behind the character, whereas this one is going in front. Again, it kind of sells that depth and says that this character is inside of something, which is nice, which is cool. So that's fun. There are two other indicators of perspective that I can think of. One is like the hands and the fingers. So again, if we think about this as a curved surface, this front of this plastic ball, then your hand here is facing that way. There's a little mouse hand. But this hand here is facing a different way, so you have like opposing angles, right? So imagining for a second that this is like a square, you would expect this square to start going like the opposite way in perspective. The main indicator of this is going to be like this bottom plane of it, which is the pads on the fingers and the palm. So this finger here, that's really good. That tells me that we have a shape. Plonk. And on that shape, this side is facing down. And so I could do the same shape, but if I have the thing over here, well, it's facing this way. If I have the thing in the middle, then it's facing straight forward, etc., etc. So that's a really strong indicator of perspective. But then this finger over here, like this finger feels like that pad should be in the middle, you know, because it's coming at us instead. So you get that warp in perspective as it's turning around. But again, that's another fairly easy little fix. So I don't mind that. The other thing you want to be relatively careful of is just the lighting of this stuff, but I think you've done a pretty good job with the lighting. Again, like the knuckle on this hand, maybe we could actually just take that finger and put it further out. Bonk. So lots of overlap here because it's turning away from us, and as it turns away from us, we're viewing this more from the side, so there's more overlap. And then in comparison, we can spread these fingers out because we're viewing them almost head on from this angle. If anything, the palm would kind of be facing away from us based on this ellipse. So it's thinking about, fundamentally, if we want to describe this as an artistic problem, it's not about hamster's hands, right? It goes a bit deeper than that. So we can break drawing up into two sections, and I say this all the time, so apologies if you've heard it, but it'll be useful for other people watching anyway. And that's this idea of optical drawing and conceptual drawing. And those can loosely be described as like thinking about things in terms of 3D, or thinking about them in terms of 2D. But where the magic happens is not one or the other, because I find that people go, I draw this way, or I draw this way. And I think the secret is to understand how they relate to each other. So like this shape, you know, that is a series of 2D shapes, but their position says something really, really important about the 3D nature of what's going on, like this thing in perspective, even though it's a really simple two shapes in perspective. And in the same way, you sort of want to pose your things in perspective so that they have appealing and easy to read 2D shapes. So it goes both ways. So that's the main first thing. The other tell for perspective is in parts of the face just a little bit weird. So let's picture this guy that's the center of his head. I'm imagining that his nose comes out and this is coming down. This form is going to come back into that form as it goes round. I think some areas you've got really, really nice 3D forms running. Like, look at the shading on the side of these hands. you're saying that's a really soft edge because it's turning around that form slowly. But this here, that's a hard edge, back to a soft edge. So you're describing that really well. But then a lot of this falls flat. I don't know if that's because you want to keep it quite graphic and quite cartoony, which is fine if you do. But I would expect, pardon me if you heard that little burp, I would expect at least that something like, well, I hate Photoshop's selections because you have to transform them manually. In fact, I might make a hotkey to transform selections. That'd be useful. I would expect something like this curved form. Like you think of this as a cute little curvy shape, just to have a bit more of that 3D depth to it. Like it's very weirdly not 3D at the moment compared with like even the ears. You've described this as like a really nice 3D disc. Yeah, can you imagine them? It feels like, again, he's coming at us, and that's nice in 3D. And it only takes a sec. You've done the same thing here, like you've got this nice wrapping around with this highlight where there's a plane change there, which is really good. Other areas where I would maybe expect some of this 3D to come back in is, I'm imagining as the mouth is going down, it's also from a side view coming out slightly, you know, if that was the jaw. And so when it comes out, before it comes out into the cheek, it might go back in. So here you might actually get this going into shadow, maybe not as deep as I've made it, before it comes back out into the cheek. So you're saying that this part of the mouth is just coming further out than the cheek again. And so you're playing around with that 3D form. Similar thing here. I think you've done a reasonably good job here, but maybe we're tempting fate and making it a little bit less cartoony, but maybe just more of an indication here of the orbit of the eye, you know, like there's a ridge here and then it drops down into the eye, and then you'd imagine it would come back up on the other side, and so maybe on this side it actually picks up a little bit of light, and then on the opposite eye the same thing might happen, but it would be that side that's in shadow and this side that picks up a little bit of light, which you kind of already have. So subtle, really subtle, but it goes a long way. And all I'm doing is using just a soft round brush. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. Other things, just while we're thinking about perspective and rendering, is, I think that's alright. Let's just follow these eyes back. I think that's okay as well. I was going to say that this eyebrow seems weirdly larger than this eyebrow. You know, should this part come up a little bit higher maybe? To make that really feel like it's going around this shape. It's going up and around. Up and around. It's almost like that cartoony sort of mask shape that you see on like Marvel superheroes. Wouldn't that latch looking thing, which latch are you talking about? Are you talking about the seam line? It's possible. Could go further down. I mean, it just depends on where the seam line is. I think this line at the back that I've drawn would go way higher up. Looking at it, I think I've drawn it wrong. So let's remove that. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about to avoid yonking on for ages is the ears. I think you've gone quite cartoony with them, which is fine, but there's an inconsistency between the two in terms of the shading. So, I mean, the first thing is I'd be tempted, even though they're cartoony, to say that there is some difference, there is some indication that the ear is going deeper as it gets closer to the head, even in a cartoony way. So let's just try and... I don't know if that is immediately maybe a little bit grotesque, you know. I think I struggle getting things to look cute and simple, and you're doing quite a good job of that. You know. But the main thing is you've described this like a TK Maxx dinner plate. So it's a round. Let's make it full opacity. It's a round object, but it has a second lip going around it that's sort of catching the light, and then on this side the lip's gonna overlap, and this would be in shadow, you know. And you can see that here, like the lip of it is catching the light, and I actually quite like that. I think maybe you could exaggerate it, if anything. You could say, look, the very edge of the ear is picking back up the light from the opposite direction. But on this side, it's not paying attention to the lighting as much. So it's concave, which means it goes in, which means the side that picks up the light is the opposite side to our light source, which is coming from over here. If it were convex, then the side that picks up the light would be the side that the light's on, and immediately, do you see how that makes it look like it's sort of popping outwards instead of going inwards? So it's concave. Our light is going to be picked up opposite the light source, and that's just as true for this ear, which is closer. So on this ear, you'd see this side picking up light. You might not see that much of it, to be honest, because it's coming into view, but actually this side over here would still get a little bit darker as it's going away. So that is now the same shape or form as this. So there's a consistency between them. But yeah, I do agree that there may be a little bit flat feeling. I wonder, could we begin to describe it as more of a conical shape? So do you see how just that shading, instead of the shading going round that way, it comes inwards to a point, those lines, and it makes it feel like this is a conical shape, and then we can have a warm shadow in the bottom of this, like they're going in, like big cones, big funnels. Let's just try and do something similar on the other side. We're not going to get anywhere near as much because we're viewing it more flat. And maybe part of that actually means we make that connection a bit thicker, like it's got somewhere to go, you know. Something like that. It is difficult to do it without killing the cartoony vibe, so we'll just have to implement this to an appropriate level. The eyes still feel a little bit weird to me. It feels like they should be the cartoon character especially, some whites of the eyes, even if it's just like a slither. There's a little bit in this eye. And then maybe to add on to that, we take some of this pink from the nose, and we say that actually it doesn't go straight from glassy bead to orange fur. There's some kind of skin or something where they connect. Again, this is maybe going a bit far from the cartoony origins that you want, but we can try. So other places where we're seeing this egg is like this cheek. That's just an egg. So take the cheek and literally grab the same colours that we've got on this egg over here. The exact same colours, exact same values. And we can put it on the cheek, so actually it should be receiving a little bit more light. And then maybe we could argue that the ridge of the nose and the forehead should also receive that light. And by extension, trunk. This ear, you know, it's going to have fur on the outside and whatever else. So, I think I'm going to leave it there. Let's recap. So, 1, I don't know what that is. Is that like an alphabet cube or something? I've no idea. So, oh, is that a truck? That's a truck, isn't it? Are we on the back of another truck? I just read this as maybe a license plate and this is a grill. Oh, it's a poster. Okay, never mind. I thought maybe it was a high-speed car chase that we were trapped in. Okay. Yeah, just something more identifiable to tell us where we are. Oh, this is a door? I'm going to stop guessing. Second thing is the ellipse on the ball. Third thing is the perspective on the hands. And then it's fleshing out a lot of the features of the face just to feel a bit more 3D. Quite a lot of work on the nose. So this was the original. And that's the changes that I'd suggest. But yeah, I've probably got a little too mad with them. I'm gonna just put this, I'll put the whole thing in the feedback channel in response to the original post. And you can decipher my mad messages by rewatching the stream, I guess. I'm gonna mute myself so that I can blow my nose. Okay. Let's close that. This is the next one. This is phase. Let's just give ourselves a little bit of room in case we want to make notes. Are you looking for any kind of feedback in particular for this? Or do you just want me to talk about anything that I notice? Hello, Robert Galliers. I only just checked on the actual YouTube chat. We're all hanging out in the Discord VC. So if I seem like I'm talking to thin air, people are writing me messages there. Just roast him. Okay. I feel like it's a personal taste thing. I'm gonna start with the personal taste things and just get them out of the way. So the completely black line work everywhere. Personally, I would be tempted to just lighten it up a little bit. So if I get the color that I'm working with as like a base and I just darken it slightly, maybe I leave the actual outline dark, but I can begin to work in a lot of things. There's a good reason for this. It's not just, it is personal taste, but I'll explain. I think maybe there's some theory behind it that could interest you. So I'll a little bit here, a little bit there. Leave the outline of the teeth black and the eyes and the eyebrows. So when you have a surface, let's imagine this is our surface, and you're saying on that surface there's a vein, or in this case, like the collarbone. It's really not coming out of that surface all that much. It's probably doing something like this, right? It's like barely leaving a dent at all, especially things like veins and some other stuff. And as soon as you do it like pitch black, it looks like it's like doing this, you know. It looks like it's really, really popping out the surface. So the only risk that you run into, which is why personally I like to maybe just lighten it a little bit, is that you're drawing the eye to something and trying to make it really, really, really obvious, where actually you want it to be a little bit more subtle, right? Do you want people to be looking right there, or would you rather kill those, kick them back a little bit? They'll still be there, so that people look more at the face or more at something else, right? The reason that the black line art kind of works for things like the hair is because the local color of the hair is already dark enough that in comparison to lines, they're not producing an awful lot of contrast. They sort of blend in automatically. You're kind of doing it here on the clothes. Some of these folds on the clothes, maybe you just drew them with less opacity. They're a bit lighter, which is nice. So that's thing number one. Thing number two. Let's talk about the clothes, actually. Let's just get a hard round. So I think less tends to be more. There's a really good book by Tom Fox about anatomy, and one of the things he talks about is actually just not drawing quite as much, drawing those key skin folds, bony landmarks, things like that, but leaving quite a lot of it to the viewer's imagination. And in places I can agree that maybe we don't need like every single fold on this arm. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And again, this is sort of taste. I'm not a big fan of the JoJo art style, but I've seen a lot of people who really, really love it. And everything that I'm telling you not to do, I'm sure they would do really, really well. So again, there's no such thing as like a rule, I would suppose. And then maybe this fold actually gets larger as it comes out, not smaller. Right. So I'm just cleaning up that arm. It doesn't have maybe the same impact. You could bring some of that stuff back in, but just right next to the silhouette, or you could do the same thing I've done for the skin and still have it, but almost have it incredibly light, like barely noticeable at all. Because I feel like in some cases like this, it kind of just feels like random zigzags and not like it's reinforcing any sort of sense of 3D form. Whereas if we kill back some of those more subtle ones, so that this really heavy fold under the armpit actually, now that's taking a lot more of the attention, and it's taking a lot more of the attention for a good reason. Like, that's an important fold in this case. It's telling us where the arm's connecting to the upper torso. So It's this idea that I think I've spoken about a reasonable amount, which is that, imagine that you have an orchestra and everyone's playing their instruments at the exact same volume. You're just not going to be able to pick out anything. It's going to be a mess. So you want some things to play a subtler part. They're doing just as important of a job, but they're doing it quietly. Like, they don't have to be really obvious in order to be doing a lot of hard work. So again, we can still have those faults, but maybe they're just a little bit more understated. Hopefully that makes sense. There's a really big, it's not perspective error, it's a physics error, I guess. So I'm imagining that you want this character to be resting the warhammer on their shoulder and sort of on their back, but at the moment they're not. So this is your character's head, and then your character, I'm imagining at most, if they're super crazy muscly, their back is going to be coming out here to then go into their shoulders. In this case, their shoulder and then their arm, right? And your warhammer is going absolutely nowhere near where it would need to go to rest on that section. It's actually resting on the fur of the I guess it's kind of a hood, but it can't actually come up like a hood. This fur collar thing, if you want that to look like a fur collar, which it does, it's not going to support the weight of a warhammer, and so it would compress downwards, right, and sort of sink in, and maybe the fur would actually come up along the side of it to say that it's sunken into that collar. But the warhammer as a whole, let's see what we can see if we can really do a number on this. I'm imagining is going to do something more like that. So let's bring back in the face and the ear. Let's get rid of that. Let's bring this up. Let's just align that over here. And then follow it along. So, let's just not worry about that for now. Actually you're going to get more overlap here with the hair, so maybe I could have made the warhammer a little bit longer so that didn't happen. But that's where I imagine it's going to go. Let's just merge these down. So that's where it was before. And actually that's with my little correction. That's where it was before. And that's where it is now. And then again we can actually say, well, a lot of this fur is coming up in front of it. Kaplunk. Right, maybe some's actually also coming out behind it. Right, where she's resting this really big heavy thing on her shoulder. But it feels more like it's bearing that weight now, because otherwise she'd just have to have like the strongest arm in the world, which maybe she does. But I don't think it's what you were going for. I mean, feel free to correct me. So that's the main thing. I think that's the biggest thing that was throwing me off about it. Otherwise, it's perfectly nice. There are a few smaller things that we kind of spoke about with the mouse in the mouse ball or the hamster ball. Like these two, I imagine you you just copy pasted them and flipped it. But what you might want to have is, you know, this side be, if it were an ellipse, you could represent this side like that, and then actually this side would be much thinner, right, because it's on more of a glancing angle. And do you see how immediately that reinforces some element of perspective there, right, as it turns around the form? So again, it's a really small thing that I think it's easy to not think about, and it's easy to go, you know, I'm drawing my character, I'm just going to copy paste this bit because it's the same on both sides. But I think you can use it to your advantage to say something about the 3D nature of what we're looking at. And why wouldn't you want to take the opportunity to say something about the 3D nature of what you're looking at? I think there are loads of opportunities for that. Another opportunity for that, while we're on the subject, is, let's just get this. So you have this line that comes down over the chest. Everything else you are telling me about this character says that the head is facing that way. Based on the clavicles, the chest is facing that way. Kind of comes back into the center here, which means maybe the upper torso goes that way, and then the body twists around to come back to being centered, which is fine. But before, again, the shape that you have here is like perfectly symmetrical, which doesn't say anything about the perspective. It says that we're viewing this 100% straight on, which is, it's okay if that's what you want, but I think you could say something a little bit more about the perspective. So this side we could have curve to the right, and then this side we could also have curved to the right, right? And now the upper torso is facing ever so slightly to the right that way, which follows what you've got here with the clavicles. Although I'm not very good with all the anatomy names, ignore me. You know, but this is reinforcing that perspective. Obviously, you could reinforce it even more by chunk, you know, moving this so it's also saying something about the perspective, and then that thing we spoke about before where actually this one's a little bit thinner in perspective. So it's like a little mini game. What shapes can we talk about? What 2D shapes say something very, very obvious about the 3D nature of something, you know? And actually, maybe now that we have a little bit more room on this side, now that the torso is facing the other way, we could explore more how this fold is sort of working, you know, as it comes around. So I think that's plenty to think about. That was the original. Those are the things that I think you can begin to think about. Some of them are just very nitpicky, like those first two especially. It's a nice drawing. It is a very nice drawing. But yeah, I think this 3D problem, it's a really subtle thing here that we're talking about. But I can imagine if you attempted to draw a character that was in maybe a more obvious perspective, this would become more of a problem. So it's still something really useful to bear in mind, even if you want to disregard it in this case. Okay? This is happening on Discord, Mundo Diminuto. So if you want to drop something in the feedback channel on the Discord, which is linked in most of my videos in the description, then feel free. I'm going to be doing more of these as well, so it's not like you've completely missed out on the opportunity. I think that's all I'm going to talk about for this one. There are other things that I would do differently, but that's not to say that the way that I do them is correct. It's just a difference in approach. Like the hair, I don't know if I would break it up into so many tiny bits of line. I would probably work with slightly bigger chunks, but again, I'm more of a painter and less of a sort of line art illustrator, so that would make sense to me to approach it in big chunks. Might not make as much sense to you, so don't worry about that. Okay, I'm gonna put that one in the feedback channel as well, and I'm gonna reply to yours. Okay, let's close that one. That's very good. Let's go with this one first, because Bob is his name. Bob? Why am I thinking his name's David? His little profile picture looks a bit like Bob Ross. Maybe that's why I'm making the connection. But David isn't here right now, so we'll have a look at this. This is very, very nice. I'll be honest. I'm looking at it, and there's not a lot that I would change. There's some stuff that, again, we've been talking about. I mean, this is almost directly the same as what we were just talking about, where, you know, are these meant to be the same size? I'm guessing not, but they're similar enough that it doesn't look deliberate. So I'm looking at these two, and I'm not going, this is the big side and this is the small side. I'm thinking, you've drawn it wrong in perspective. Like, it's meant to be smaller because it's further away or something. So if you do want this side to be smaller and the other side to be bigger, I would really emphasize that fact. Like, actually you have, let's just, the other thing is there's a lot of weight coming from a cloak. So a cloak is always going to want to separate, which is why you have to have a clasp in the first place. And so actually it could be quite nice to have this, almost like the gears on a bicycle, bigger to smaller change, and have it quite clean and quite crisp. You know, if it's tense, like it's not floppy, then it feels like actually it is doing something. It's pulling these things together. It's under some kind of duress. But that is also just kind of my opinion, which I guess all of this is. So we're okay with that. And then this one flopping down. That's cool as well. But yeah, I definitely exaggerate the differences in size if that was something you were going for. Maybe you can put it in VC if it was or wasn't. Because otherwise it just kind of looks maybe like it's an error or unintended or something. So I'd think about that. Okay. Yeah. And as well as resizing them, no, don't open camera raw. Maybe we do that thing I was just talking about as well, where we're viewing this one on more of an angle. Yeah, and maybe that edge on that angle picks up more light as it's beveling around or something. So, you know, something like that. Maybe that angle's a bit too extreme compared with the rest of this plane. I don't think it would actually be doing that. But other places where this is happening again, and I'm surprised at how often I feel like I noticed it once and now I'm seeing it everywhere, is like this shape that's coming down, and so it's this curve down. But this shape Is it curving back and over the shoulder that far, or should it be curving almost like outwards and then back up that way? Does that make sense? And actually we're seeing part of this arm go behind it. Let's try and so both curved, or one curve one way, one curve the other. Because I'm just imagining this as I have a sphere, or not even a sphere. I have a cylinder, and this is the center point, and this is coming down and around. And as it does so, this feels like it's going that way, but really that feels like on average it's going that way. It sort of curves down at the middle there, right? So just think about constructing it like that. I love the moon, planet, big thing. I love this snaking stuff. Some bits are really crisp where maybe they shouldn't be, but that's a minor. Again, a minor. All of this is minor nitpicking because it's a very nice painting. So maybe we just soften some of that out a little. I think my issue is when it's. Let's just see if we can. Something like that, isn't it? Oh, almost. Okay. But when it has no internal hard edges, I feel like it reads better as one big graphic shape. But as soon as you go, oh, and also inside of this big graphic shape, there's like a hard edge, then you're saying there's like a plane change here almost, which disrupts that a little. So I just try and keep it nice and graphic. I think it's cool. Graphic is cool, right? Oh my god, can you hear the devil children outside my house yelling? Wow. So keeping it even more flat. You thought you heard a little rat? No, that was a child. That was a child. Yeah, I'd do that. This here, this seems a little awkwardly cut off. Feels like it should continue. And then maybe this side continues under there or something. Tiny nitpicky thing, isn't it? Like introducing more of that shadow coming across this hand. I think this hand works better than this one. I think these are maybe a bit too angular. You know, this is especially this part of the finger, it's maybe a bit rounder than you're giving it credit for. Like more cylindrical. And actually maybe there's a bit more depth in between the fingers, especially near the knuckles. So we could think about that a little. Do you want the hands to be more of a focus than they are? Probably not. I think they're nice. They're nice and understated. But like, could we have it so that they're even more lost down there in shadow? Because you do a really good job of that up here with the face. A lot of these edges are just lost. The chin falls off almost to complete shadow. The neck is way down in there. But then these hands have this super sharp silhouette, so can we just obscure them a little bit more maybe? I think so. Yeah, very, very large rat. Hey Keycap, if you want any critique, you can find it in some of my video descriptions. There's a Discord invite. Let me hop on YouTube and just drop an invite into the description of the stream, or I guess I can drop it into the chat. But people are just putting stuff in feedback in the feedback channel in the Discord. So give me a second. In fact, I get the chance to use my Be Right Back OBS function. Look at that. Wow. We're getting advanced now, guys. And then the stream might tank while I load YouTube. So be patient. And then I'm going to hop in my own live. And then I've got to wait for the chat to load. Come on. The chat takes a second. I pray that it loads eventually. Okay. While we wait for it to load, we'll continue, and then I'll pop it in when it's there. Okay. Similar thing happening. I spoke about those sort of hard plane changes with this graphic moon shape in the background. Something is going on with this big block of like purple. I feel as though you're trying to silhouette the cape here, but you're not bringing that silhouette far enough out, so it sort of sits in the one spot. Like, can we make it feel like it's actually a bit of light that's curving around a moon? And if maybe when it curves around the moon, it continues over onto this side. So actually we get this sort of overall, like this is a shaded sphere in the background. And then you also get the added bonus of that sweeping line going through your figure. And everyone likes a sweeping line going through their figure, right? Okay, I've just put a Discord invite in the chat, so maybe hopefully that stays in there forever.
Hello.
Hello. You are audible to the world.
Hi.
There you are. Let's just undo my big sweeping line. Those are the main things that I'm getting from this. We can nitpick a little bit more. Like this cape, again, it's the further down it goes, especially maybe it's going to try and come back out. So it's going out here. It's being pulled back in here by the hand. But then maybe from that point, it starts to come back out again. Maybe this one starts to come back out again as well. So, but that is such a tiny little thing. I really like this. I like how understated a lot of it is. Let's have a think. Like, I like this lost edge. We don't need it. Who needs the tip of the nose? Not us. We just don't need it. There's something a little bit funky about the perspective on the mouth and the lips. So let's just check that out. So here's our nose. There's eye1. eye2 has to at least be over here, which means that we're viewing the face maybe like that. So actually, if that's the case, should we bring this nostril slightly further over and then maybe just indicate a second nostril? Literally as simple as that. Teeny tiny change. While we're thinking about the perspective of the face, we're going to get the barrel of the mouth. It's going to come down into the chin, and then back round. Probably something like that, right? Because this surface is going round the mouth. Yeah, especially if you look at something like a give me a second. I really enjoy doing, I have really enjoyed doing sculpts recently, and it's because some of this stuff becomes a lot more obvious when you're in a 3D tool. So, not that one. Like you can, it's so pronounced on a skull, especially if you're 3D modeling the skull, that we can get it there, and we can feel it going around that, down and back into this part of the jaw, pops out at the chin. I think that's a lot more obvious, but it shows up when you're painting it as well, especially like the curve of the mouth going around the lips. So if you want the head to be more turned away from us, you can. I actually think it would be more work to fix, because if you want the head more turned away from us, then I think you'd have less of this eye. I think you'd have this eye come down like that, and you'd have to start introducing this eye like here or something. So you probably have to paint a second eye. The fact that we can't see this eye says to me that it's somewhere over here, which sort of spins the head back in that direction. Does that make sense? So you can do either, but you have to commit to it, and you have to make it feel like that thing, you know. So I'll just continue the direction that I was going in. So imagining that it's like this, and to be honest, imagining that it's more turned away, I think the lips problem is going to be even more obvious. So you're having this turned down quite a lot at the end here, round that thing, but you're not doing the same thing with the nostrils, you know. So maybe this side of the nose would also have to turn down as it goes around that barrel. Maybe the bottom lip wouldn't so obviously turn up. Bottom lip, bottom lid, you know, because we're also viewing that from further down. Maybe the top lid, it would become more obvious that it's with you looking up at it in perspective or something. But then my main problem with this is these two angles. So the angle between the crest of the top lips it's okay. Ideally it would be parallel to the nose, but it's close enough that no one's gonna notice or care. But then the angle of the bottom lip is going like in the opposite direction. which is okay, assuming that your horizon line is there and all of these features go even crazier in perspective, you see? I think that the solution would be to also have this follow the same perspective more or less. So you'd want that bottom lip to sort of come out and then follow that line upwards for the shadow of the bottom lip and then go back up into the rest of the lips. You could make that a lot more subtle. I think I've accidentally given her lip fillers or something. So you could play around with where you want that. But it's this idea of just bringing it back into something that feels a bit more in line with whatever else it is that you've done. Part of that might actually be with this eye, you know, from this angle are the eyelashes going to feel like they're going downwards instead of straight across. Maybe. That's something we can think about for sure. For sure. But yeah, I hope this has been helpful. It is such a nice painting that a lot of this is just like little things. And it's little things that you wouldn't fix at the end of a painting. You'd fix at the start of the painting, you know? I don't know how it is you approach this. Maybe did you just paint it or did you do a drawing? If you did do a drawing, then you just got to double, triple check these things. Make sure they're nice and tidy and where they should be. If you didn't do a drawing, maybe consider doing a little drawing. There was a drawing, but process nightmare, of course. So those are the main things. There's other little. I'll say one last little tiny thing, and it'll take me a second. This stack of hair, where it's like big shape, slightly smaller shape, slightly smaller shape, even smaller shape, is maybe too uniform as it goes back. Feels like a repeated shape, or a repeated sort of pattern. And you might want to throw it off, especially something as organic as hair. It might actually, you know, swap some of these around. Have big shape, small shape, slightly small shape, tiny shape. You know, so that it just feels a bit more interwoven and not as staged, which is fine. Similar idea here. That's a little one, and then a big one. Maybe you could break these up. They're similar sizes. Could we have like really big one, small one, you know, big, medium, small. Just to play around, but yeah, I'm just gonna slap this in feedback as a response to your original. Okay. And David's here, so we can talk about his drawings next.
Hooray.
Success, victory. This is going to have to be a screenshot because apparently the one I'm working on is too big for Discord. So there it is as a screenshot. Okay, let's close it. Job done. David, these aren't from life, but this might be. Is this from life?
This one is from life. The other one, of course, is not from life. No.
Okay. Let's have a think. I like a lot of this stuff. Like I like some of these shapes that you're getting. That is such a nice shape that says a lot about the underlying anatomy. Some stuff on the face. How big is your hand? Oh, there it is. So what, this is A3?
I cut it down to a weird size. I think it's like slightly larger than an A4
Okay.
piece of paper.
Yeah, so maybe, you know, these shapes they're getting a little bit small and imprecise. Like this is the underside of the nose, but assuming this is the middle of the mouth, it's maybe dropping a bit too far down. You'd expect it to be a little bit higher up. somewhere. But it's such a tiny thing that basically what I'm saying is when you're drawing from life, draw big. The bigger you draw, the more we can, the more you will be made aware of when you're doing things inaccurately or wrong. This guy, maybe he did. This is some of the problem with critiquing a drawing from life is, I don't know, maybe your model had like a really weird shaped head. But it feels like the tone you've put down on the background here should begin to fall back down, like the slope of the front of the head. Does that make sense? But again, feel free to tell me if this guy did have like a.
I don't think he did. No.
Right. So yeah, getting that. Some areas you have edges where you were really close to losing edges, but then you added in an edge anyway. So like I really quite like the idea that the shadow shape of the hand, if I can sample the, I've never not point sample. Let's get a 5x5 average. Okay, so like the idea that this shadow shape combines with the shadow shape on the back of the head, like I think that's a beautiful thing. And you're beginning to think like a painter, and we like that. But then in your version, you've like also put an edge in there, or there are gaps where you haven't drawn, or so it's sort of split up a little bit. Then on the topic of this ear, I think on your version it's getting fairly light compared with the shadow side of the head that it's on. I know it's going to have subsurface, so it can get warmer, but I don't know if it's going to get lighter. So just watch out for that. Obviously, it depends on the tools you've got. Maybe that was just the color of pastel that you had, but you can begin to blend and mix oil pastels together and make new and fantastical things.
Pastels really damaging.
They're what you thought blending oil pastels was really damaging? Is that what you just said?
Oh no. But they were chalk pastels, and I found them challenging, not damaging.
Okay. They are really challenging because it's like colored pencil but with less control, but I think you've done a fun job. I like a lot of this. Now there's a pretty big disparity between some of the shadows and some of the other shadows. So this is getting really, really dark. But then here you're suggesting that actually there's a lot of warm light that's sort of bouncing around the scene and entering some of these shadow shapes. I think if I were painting or drawing from life, especially not from a photo, I'd tend to ham up the how much light's bouncing around the scene. I'd go for something more like this and a little bit less like that. So maybe we just take this and we warm it up a little bit, so that they're just a bit more unified in terms of the kind of light that we're seeing. I like this sharp line through the leg to say that there's a specular highlight. He does seem like quite a shiny man, the way that you've drawn him. So yeah, all oiled up for the life drawing session. We love it. I'd kind of expect to see something similar on this leg, but you can imagine that depending on where the light is, on this leg it might be closer to the silhouette, and that's sort of an indication of perspective. I think this is not the greatest way of drawing or depicting a foot. Let's just grab our shadow value. So that's a nice shape here, but that should continue over here. Like this is still the shadow side of that set of toes. Feels like that would also be in shadow. And then you've got these little tiny lines to indicate space between toes. I think you could get rid of them and just think about a more obvious line between the big toe and the rest of the toes. maybe if you did want to put in some kind of information about the toes there, you could prioritize a different kind of information, which is actually that the front of the toes might be getting less light. So it's kind of this transition from it's the midpoint between drawing and painting, where you're beginning to think about getting different basically planes in. So I'm thinking about which direction some of these things are facing and how much light they're picking up, and that is what things like pastel are quite useful for, is if you're not quite up to doing a painting from life with acrylics or oils, but you're quite comfortable with like charcoal and pencil, then I think something like chalk or oil pastel is like the midpoint where you're moving towards doing a painting. You're working in bigger shapes, and as soon as you start working in bigger shapes, those shapes become a little bit more important, and they say a little bit more about what it is that you're approaching. So stuff like that's quite fun. Do you know about the difference between a core and a cast shadow and where they appear?
Yeah. So, core shadow is like the darkest point of a shadow,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, I mean, cast shadows.
Cast
Well,
shadows. Cast shadows.
doesn't
Cast
core
shadow is
also doesn't core also kind of refer to ambient occlusion a little bit too?
It can do,
Or
yeah. It also is used to refer to a form shadow, so I always get them
okay,
mixed up. Core or form. I use them interchangeably. Some people say core, some people say form. So here's our sphere. Here's it lit. Like just this shadow as it goes across this versus this shadow here, like this part here, you might say is the core of the shadow or the form shadow. The main difference is in the quality of the edge of it. So this might be nice and crisp because it's a cast shadow, but this might be nice and soft because it's turning around the form. So as the light turns around the form, that's getting a bit softer. But then because the light is completely blocked by the form, a cast shadow is going to be wonderful and crisp and hard.
okay.
So I think you're getting that and you're understanding that intuitively because you're looking at the model and you're going, this is a soft shadow where light's turning, so I'm going to draw it as a soft shadow. So an area like this, like the leg, I think you're doing a great job of saying, look, this is cylindrical, this is a soft transition around. But then other areas like this, with this thick purple line, let's try and get purple. You're sort of saying that's actually a very hard transition. You've even reinforced this one with like a darker blue pencil, this here. And I think that's actually going to be so much softer as it's turning around. So don't be afraid to smudge that area. And then let's find an actual cast shadow. This one underneath the neck. That would be a cast shadow onto the shoulder. Let's just get rid of that. So that you can keep razor sharp, that edge there. But you have to do, well, you don't have to, obviously there are no rules. I find it works best if you really want this to read as a crisp, hard cast shadow, then you can't put crisp, hard edges elsewhere where they don't belong, because you're sort of devaluing that edge. Sargent spoke a lot about classifying edges and saying, well, this is the hardest edge in my image and this is the softest edge, and everything else has to sit somewhere in between the two. Well, if this is the hardest edge, but then all of a sudden this thing up here that's meant to be quite soft, you make equally as hard, this doesn't quite feel as important anymore, or it doesn't feel like it's having the same impact. So that's a cast shadow, nice and crisp. But this, it's chalk. Let's just imagine that we soften it a little. So it's still there, you're still getting that purple edge, which I think is really nice. It's really cool. But it's just a little bit softer. And even within a core shadow, maybe it's softer at the top. and like crisper down here where we're going from more muscle to less muscle. So you get variation within that thing. Obviously,
Mm.
this is tricky because you're using a medium that you're uncomfortable with and is challenging. And so, whether or not you actually have enough just sort of dexterity and familiarity with the chalk to be able to get this difference in edge quality. I found that when I started doing oil painting not long ago, that was a big problem. Is I knew what I wanted in my head, but I just physically couldn't actually get the mark down. So it's just something to work on. But
Mm. Yeah, I found that blue light to the left there really
it
challenging.
is.
It was like
It's any coloured light always catches you.
it was,
Yeah.
it was like a dark value, but it was
Mm-hmm.
not a shadow. So, but yeah, it was challenging.
Yeah. So I mean, light into light should blend even more. It really is tricky. Let me pull up a similar painting that I've done, and we'll just see. We'll just see if we can spot some of the same things happening. Because I remember doing a guy lit by different coloured lights that's sitting down in a similar-ish pose. It wasn't traditional. I did it digitally. If I can't find it in my giant folder of gubbins. What year was it? 2020? Maybe. This is a big problem I have is actually organizing my files to be able to find anything at all. If I don't find it within the next minute, we're not going to look at it. It's got to be 2021. It was during COVID, so it was an online session. Oh, I found it. Okay. So he's got a blue light. It's probably not quite as crazy and obvious as yours. But a lot of the way that you get this to read as blue is not actually by it being blue. It's just cool. So it's actually kind of grey. It is slightly blue, but mostly grey. And because it's grey on something else that's very warm, it reads as blue in comparison. So just the fact that your toned paper seems quite warm, it's like a nice warm toned paper, means that maybe we can kill the saturation of this. And it's still going to read as blue without being like mad. But I don't mind the electric blue you've used, to be honest. I think it's all right. So I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to put this in. No, I'm not. I've got one last thing I want to talk about, which is background tone. Background tone, I think, is really important. I think it should form as much of a part of drawing the figure as the figure itself. I find that a lot of my students tend to sort of put it on at the end, or just do a little teeny bit of it, and this kind of it's almost like you're making a shape with it. Was there actually a shape behind him that you were trying to capture, or is it just that it's naturally ended up looking like a floating sky?
I think it's just ended up looking like that.
Okay, that's fine. So what I would do instead, is I would probably just have it. There's a lot of dynamism that you can get into this thing. You can have these lines flowing out of the figure or upwards, or maybe if the lighting is coming across side to side, then the background tone you actually do going up and down, so that you're getting a difference there. But I pull so much more of this off because this side is you want this to feel a little bit darker. So counterintuitively, you might leave the background lighter, and this side is being hit by the strong neutral or neutral warm light. So actually we can, in comparison, drop the background down further. Just use a bit more of it. You don't have to fill the whole thing in like I'm doing, but I mean you could. It's not going to take you very long with a big stick of chalk, and in comparison, these lights now feel a bit stronger, which might help with this blue light. So thinking about that, there's a little bit of background tone here that's actually just the same value as the paper. That could be a nice idea, just to contrast the cool of the blue, to get something warm down. But I might just use the tone paper to your advantage there and not put anything in. Other places where you might want to just crispen up the silhouette, and I mean like really use the chalk sort of diagonally, use the tip of it, the edge of it, press hard and sharpen up something like the silhouette down here. Because we lose the silhouette of this back. I mean, maybe on your original, even on your original, like this blue is not showing up a lot on this paper, and that's fine. We can lose a lot of the. Is it this layer? Yeah. Let's bring back some of your beautiful. So we're losing a decent amount of the back, but that means we have to rediscover it somewhere else. Like we don't have to. You could just have the whole thing be lost, but I think it's quite nice sometimes to say, look, here's a soft edge, really, really soft. These are basically the same, and so I'm going to contrast it with a really hard edge. Is the Plants vs. Zombies theme playing? What? Okay, well, for anyone watching the stream on YouTube, sorry. But, alright, let's grab this. I'll put this in the feedback channel.
It's Moro.
Do you want me to talk about the other ones as well?
Yeah, sure, if you have anything to say.
You're going for like a gesture drawing?
Yeah. I wanted to try my hand at lighting it, but as you already know, it's not from life.
Mm-hmm.
So the figure on the left, I found on Pinterest, and so he had lighting, but the lady on the left, I just kind of made her up, so I had to imagine the light.
Okay.
And I don't think it looks very consistent, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, some of this stuff's quite nice. I think some of this stuff is, yeah, like I can imagine that top plane would be lit. That's fine. But again, it's that separation between core and cast. Is that going to be dark because it's in the shadow of the head? Maybe. I think the main takeaway from this isn't it's not anything about your drawing. It's just this idea that depending on what you want to practice, you probably want to split it up into separate exercises. So there's a huge difference between something like a gesture drawing. These are some gesture drawings I did yesterday or the day before. I can't remember. And like they're very, very simple. There's not a lot of information. And they're mainly about getting proportion and flow, things like that. Right, so a lot of the proportion here, a little bit weird. Like this foot seems oddly long compared with this foot. But I don't know. It's almost like a hand or a monkey's paw, maybe. Um, and then you're also trying to do a foreshortened face, and we spoke about it when we went through Secret Saxon's painting earlier. There's so much to bear in mind when you're drawing a face in any kind of perspective that you'd almost want that to be like a separate exercise in itself to figure that stuff out. And this is true not just in terms of learning, but actually if you wanted to do a final painting that you wanted to hang up or put in a gallery or for a job or anything else, you would do that. This is what people do, is they go, I've got this figure, so actually I'm going to do a series of gestures where I just figure out how to get the mood and the personality of the thing. Then maybe I do a study of a torso where I figure out exactly what kind of anatomy is going on here, and I light it in different ways and see what that looks like. Maybe you do a separate painting where you just figure out how this head's working and how it's connecting to the rest of the body. So I get it. It's like you found something on Pinterest and you wanted to draw it, practice it, which is fine. But I think there are more efficient or just different ways to explore some of this stuff. Another big thing to think about is shoulder blades. I just don't know where this arm is going. Feels to me like if this arm is coming further out that you'd want the shoulder blade like higher up, and you'd want the arm coming from higher up. So yeah, different ways to practice different things, and you want to pick the one that's most appropriate for whatever it is that you're doing. Okay. I don't think I'll bother putting that one in the feedback channel because I've barely drawn on it. But
Thank you. I appreciate it.
you're welcome. Keep drawing and keep. Are you doing life drawing as like part of a course, or is it just local life drawing sessions or something?
That one was local, just local life drawing sessions. But yeah.
Yeah. Keep going.
I'm trying to
I honestly think it's the most valuable thing that you can do as an artist is life drawing. It's super powerful. The more of it you can do, the better.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the feedback. I
No,
appreciate it.
you're welcome. Is Bree gone? Has Bree left? No. Right. Bree's gone, so we'll not look over that. Maybe Bree will come back. Maybe we'll do that later, just so that maybe Bree can see it in the recording. Bad ball. No, not bad ball guy. Ball bad guy. Very different vibes. Let's save this out. This skull. Don't crash on me now, Photoshop. You can do it, Photoshop. Okay. Have you said anything about this? Not been painting for long, so my work isn't amazing, and this is a bit of an older painting, but it's one that you're definitely relatively proud of. What would I do to improve it? It's kind of unfinished at the moment. Is it just that you didn't have the time to finish it, or that you moved on to other things? I don't know. Are you in the Discord VC or the YouTube VC? You're in the YouTube. But obviously things like the cast shadow. I see this quite a lot with people. Let's just, and I think when you're learning to paint, which you are, it's a really good thing to actually just paint everything inside of an image, right? So I might have an image where it's a red background, and then there's a table, And then on top of the table, there's a grey jar. Like that. And the grey jar has like a neat highlight on it. Right. And maybe the grey jar even has some like red on it. But if I take away the red background, it looks weird and wrong, and I don't get the context of the things around it helping it read. So I think you have to view an image as a whole. Even when you're doing figure drawing, like we just looked at David's figure drawing, the background in a figure drawing when you're in a classroom, you don't have to pick up exactly what's in the background, what kind of wallpaper there is, but some kind of tone or value to indicate that there is a background is going to help us put into context the values and colors that we're seeing on the subject itself. So in this case, that's something like the cast shadow. I think the cast shadow would have been such an easy thing to put on as well. So it's not a high stress thing. It's not going to take you a million years. It's actually one of the first things that I'd get on, is the idea that there's some kind of shadow here. And you see, as soon as it's been put into a context, it feels a lot more like a tangible object that's in a tangible space, and maybe it gets a bit darker here where the skull's actually touching the table. So I think that can help. I think that can really help. But it speaks to this bigger idea of I don't really want to critique the painting too much, but I want to talk about actually approaching a painting like this, And I think a big thing that I would do really, really early, just going to color pick, is actually get like the bigger picture idea going, where you're not developing the image and then going, right, and now I'm going to think about this next bit. Now I'm going to think about the lower jaw, and now I'm going to think about this. It's like you're thinking about it all at once, which if you just started painting can be really, really overwhelming. But actually, that bigger picture thinking is really important. Everything in relation to everything else. So, there's my skull. And then maybe we go in and we start defining stuff. But like the shadow side of the skull in relation to the cast shadow, in relation to the lit side, like I'm figuring those out pretty early on. Yeah. So other things that you are figuring out but could be improved is this light over here. All of this is like a bounce light. I think you're overstating it just a little bit. So we have the shadow side of the skull and we have the lit side of the skull. And actually, let's just allow the shadow side to be a little lower contrast. Right, so there is bounce light in there, but what I find most people do is they go, oh, there's bounce light, let's put on something really bright. It's barely any lighter than what's already there. It doesn't need to be super crazy. So we can play around in something a bit more subtle. Here's a top tip for skulls, and by virtue of the fact that faces are made with skulls, which is parallel lines. So if I take this line here and I just take it, I can move it anywhere else and I can say, oh, well, the bottom of your eye cavities is lined up, so that's good. But maybe this shape for the bottom of the nose isn't isn't lined up. You know, this should go further forwards before it comes in. Let's look at the mouth. You know, some of these teeth aren't exactly where they should be. And then let's look at the chin. So actually you've got the chin curving around a bit too much at the end there, where it could come down a little bit more. So getting those things parallel is nice and important. But you are doing a good job of noticing things like this, the fact that this comes in to a hard point that then goes out, and then you've actually got this plane change here where it turns back around the cylinder. I think that's good, but you need to, again, I think because you've thought about the teeth as a separate entity almost, they feel like they're stuck on separately on like a separate layer. So what I would do is I would just think about the components of this skull as one thing, right? I know that the teeth are a slightly different color, but we can get to that. So I'm just thinking about this as one thing. I'm just thinking about the fact that this mouth is turning around and away from us like a cylinder as one object. Imagine you're sculpting it out of clay. So I'm getting these big forms. There's going to be light that comes down from this jaw. I think the jaw itself could maybe afford to go a little bit darker. Don't know, maybe that's too dark. Again, we've got like the shadow under the jaw. Now that shadow is so important because it says something about the perspective, which is nice. So let's get that one. Why not get that one? And then what I might start doing is going, where's the midpoint on the head? Actually, you can see that line inside the nasal. So the midpoint is somewhere like that. It's going to go down, in, round. This might come around to there. And I can just start to imply something about the teeth. So if I put a shadow on that side, I'm immediately saying that that's the shadow side of one of those teeth. Right, and maybe I do that a couple of times. The other thing that's quite nice about the teeth is that they're shiny. So maybe I brighten up the value, but really they're still a sort of homogeneous part of the rest of the painting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but did you like... Oh no, it doesn't look like you did. I was going to say, did you paint one tooth and copy paste it, but... No, you haven't. Maybe we go back onto yours and we take your teeth. There they are. Let's set them to darken, and let's lower the opacity. You know, and it can be nice and simple. It doesn't have to be super high detail. I think the more you paint, the more you'll figure out that painting is all about simplifying things and making them readable with as little information as possible. Like a good painter can simplify stuff quite well. And so even this is like more tooth than I would probably ever paint, you know. But it's actually thinking about the areas around the teeth and like where these are connecting, and this shape here for these. The silhouette of the teeth is more important than the shapes inside of the teeth themselves. So that's what I would end up thinking about. But the main takeaways from this are like, consider the image as a whole. Shadows on something are going to be quite important. You're actually fairly okay with the proportions that you've got going on, and you're going to get better the more you draw anyway. So the thing that I want you to take away from this it's not about this skull, it's about how you approach learning and painting in general, because I don't think this seems like very high fidelity, like you've really gone this super precise and then tried to match your colours exactly. I think you may be worrying a little bit too much, especially with these teeth, like hand painting all of this. And you actually want to zoom out and think about the big picture. It's actually something that I recommended in a video a year ago or something, is zooming out, like literally painting at this size on your PC, right? So here's a skull, I'm going to draw on here. I can't zoom in, which means that I'm only seeing big shapes, big relationships between colors and shadow and light and everything else. And what you get at the end is like a fairly low resolution representation of the thing that you were painting, but that's fine. So let me find an example of one that I've done like that, because I paint a lot of skulls. I paint a lot of skulls very regularly. So this is from life on my desk. And if you zoom out, it's like, wow, that's a nice realistic skull. If you zoom in, like I don't even have an edge on this nasal cavity. You could say, well, actually there should be an edge there and an edge there. And yeah, maybe there should, but I'm thinking about big 2D shapes that I'm seeing next to each other. Like this plate in the background is effectively a shadow shape, a yellow ellipse with some scribbles. That shadow shape in the background is a pillow, but you wouldn't know it really. That's my lanyard for my job, and that's just like a sort of abstract red shape. Okay, so big shape relationships first. My skull, you will always be able to recognize my skull because it came with one of the teeth missing. And so every skull painting I do, I actually really like this missing tooth now, because it's helpful. Because when I'm painting a skull, all I do is I go, here's my thing, and then I go, that's where the missing tooth is. And all of a sudden it looks like there's a mouth there, right? I recognize that as being a mouse, the mouth. So yeah, big picture thinking is the takeaway that I want you to get from this. Okay. So let's close that. I'll put this in feedback. Please let me paste it in. Please. I'll just screenshot it. Okay, who else have we got? Does someone in the Discord VC? Has someone put anything? Yes. Okay. How are we doing over on YouTube? Looks okay. No one's got anything else that they want to put in. So we've got this last one. Which is great timing because I'm quite hungry, so I'm ready to go and make my dinner. So it's Paleoart. I love Paleoart. I really like Paleoart. Is there a particular reference of an actual rhino that you used for this? I don't, maybe it's a big ask for you to go and hunt it down. But the thing that jumps out to me at the moment is that the lighting is really ambient. Right, there isn't like a direct light source hitting your thing, which if you're trying to show off a thing, a form, isn't exactly ideal. Like the ambient lighting. How can I word it? I think the ambient lighting is is not a choice. It's not like a creative choice. It's almost like a lack of a creative choice. Because if you had a hard lighting setup, then you could say, oh, well, actually, I want to light this creature from a particular angle that's going to show off these 3D forms in the best way possible. Whereas at the moment, because it's just an overcast day and everything's lit ambiently, unless you're going for a particular mood, like it's quite a moody image, which I wouldn't say this is, or most paleo art is, then I'd pick something a bit stronger. Because as soon as you pick something a little bit stronger, we can say that, look, this form going on for the stomach of this Brontotherium, like, we can say, well, it's lit from up and to the left, and so it has a stronger form shadow. It has a side that is definitely in shadow and a side that is definitely in light, and we can go around and we can do that with almost all of these forms that go on, like that big shoulder blade, and it's much more descriptive. Like, it says something a lot more direct about what it is that we're painting. Obviously, by contrast, you might want the lit side to become a little bit brighter, and it generally, in terms of the image, I think a lot of it would get. In fact, let's just duplicate the image and change the levels. So you see how this is. Yeah. I think a lot of people get sort of afraid to be a little bit bolder with their painting, but I think it's only ever going to work out in your favor. So I think if you are really confident with the brushstrokes you're putting down and the forms you're trying to describe, either it's going to go really well and you're going to have some really, really kick-ass forms that like look great, or it's going to go bad, or it's not going to go how you wanted it to, but because you're doing it so confidently, I think those mistakes are not going to be obvious to your audience or whoever's looking at this thing. They're almost going to feel deliberate. It's like, well, that's just a choice that you've made, rather than something like this where maybe it does feel like you're being a bit timid about painting this thing. Like, you're not confidently saying, no, this is the form of this creature. It does this. And so, yeah, just going like, look, all I did was change the levels at the end. And it's going to stand out way more. Feels like it's daylight now. And so now that it feels like it's daylight, let's put back on those shadows. And maybe we begin to say something about the color of our bounce light. So we've got daylight hitting this green. And so maybe in our bounce shadows get a little teeny bit green. I'm probably going a bit too mad with it. But maybe I need to go more mad with it, and then it'll look a bit more deliberate. The main area I want to work on, let's talk about form changes in general, actually, because I feel like there's a bit of a hack here that might help you. So I don't know how long you've been hanging around the core for, but we spoke about the difference between core and cast shadows. And so if this is like a, please work with me first. So if this is our sphere for our rhino or Brontotherium, and then this is our cast shadow, our form shadow, sorry, and then we'll have a little bit of bounce light down here, and actually this bounce light, maybe our bounce light will be a little bit green. Well, that's fine. We can even say that this floating orb has a cast shadow down here in the grass that's broken up by grass and whatever else. So Brontotherium has come into contact with alien orb. But do you notice that there's something really fun happening here, which is that we're getting a contrast between something soft really soft gradation going around this, and something very, very, very crisp, very hard, like that. It's the same thing with a cast shadow. So we can get that in elsewhere. Because at the moment, on your original, it might also have something to do with the fact that it's so grey that a lot of it, just by virtue of the fact that everything is very low key and overcast and grey, everything is very low contrast, and because it's so low contrast, you don't get the opportunity to describe the difference between a cast shadow and a form shadow. Everything is just a sort of form shadow, right? Everything is blobby. So if we make it brighter, then we can say, look, this part is really soft, but this part down here, no, let's get that. In fact, we'll just put it there. Is like really crisp and sharp, and we can make decisions like that. All other stuff, we can make decisions like that inside of the thing as well. So let's take one of these folds. Yeah, this fold here. So this is a fold behind the elbow. So we'll say this side is sharp, right? So I'm using the lasso selection to say this side is sharp, but this side is soft. And that feels like a nice sharp crease. It should probably get a little bit softer at the top. And we can do that wherever we want. So we can make a lasso selection, and we can say one side sharp, one side soft, and we can almost do it at the same time with this brush. So that's also going to happen over here. So you're going to say, let's just clear it out first. You're going to say this side sharp, that side soft, and it feels a little bit more 3D as it's turning in. I'm not very clear on exactly what a brontotherium looks like, so I'm going to Google it. But maybe there are some bigger changes we can make to the structure of the face. Like I'm seeing in most of the art depicted of this stuff that maybe the nostrils are a little bit more obvious. One thing is actually it's going to be the inverse, isn't it? The amount of like wrinkles and stuff is a little bit clearer. So all I'm doing is using a soft brush and a lasso selection to try and do that. But like places like the mouth especially, that's a huge fold area, and so just getting that crease there says that there's a mouth. You know, maybe does that crease again up here, even if it's just subtle. A lot of people are also depicting them with these very strong brow bones and very, very strong cheekbones. So I don't know, obviously the joy of Paleoart is you get to depict this thing how you want to depict it. But I think we can do more to set this apart from a modern day rhino. Like, let's just look at the skull of one of these things. It seems like the cheekbones do seem like a huge difference. I've seen a rhino skull and it doesn't look like that. So let's bring those cheekbones up. That thing goes down, but that's fine. Seems like the jaw is also going to be larger. I don't know what this thing's diet was, but let's bring that jaw out. And then by virtue of the fact that the jaw's larger, you know, maybe the neck going into it is a bit more chunky. And because all of the neck is a bit more chunky, it needs more muscles on its back to support that, so it all sort of has this knock-on effect of all of this becoming a little bit heavier, a little bit denser. In fact, you can see on the skeleton that it has these insane, you know, on its skeleton, it has these big spinous processes, a bit like a bison. And so maybe we do want to really pull that up and say that it has a much bigger sort of crest there. And a lot of these lines are saying that the skin is sort of pulled over that form. Right? So I'm going to take a photo of this, and I'm going to just send it in the VC. Sometimes they have it down. Okay. Yeah, Paleoart's really cool. Really, really interesting. I'd like to get into it more. Right. We're going to stop it there so I can eat something. But, no, thank you. Thank you for everyone that's taken part. This is basically advertising for my Patreon server, because we do this every week in the Patreon server. But I thought this week, A, we didn't have many patrons that wanted feedback. And B, I just thought it would be nice. So, yeah, if you want more of this, I think I still will come and do it in the Puppy server, because I've had a lot of fun. But yeah, we do it over in the Patreon. So check that out whenever. But thank you for coming along to the stream. Enjoy it if you're watching it as a video, and have a good rest of your weekend. So